I didn't know my marriage was already over when the rain refused to stop. It had been raining for 3 days straight when my husband, Jonathan, told me he wanted a divorce. We were sitting at Bella Vista, his favorite restaurant in Manhattan, the one where the waiters greeted him like old friends, where they always saved his preferred window table, where I always felt slightly out of place, no matter how many times I'd been there. My plate sat untouched in front of me. The food had gone cold, but I hadn't noticed. I was watching him, really watching him. Maybe for the first time in months. The way he laughed a little too loudly at something Danielle said over the phone. The way he didn't look at me when the call ended. The way the light caught on his cufflinks I'd given him for our 8th anniversary, back when I still believed we were building a life together instead of just sharing an address. "You're not eating," Jonathan said at last. There it was, that edge in his voice. The same one that appeared whenever I failed to perform my role correctly, whenever I stopped being convenient. "Are you trying to make some kind of statement, Marianne?" I wasn't. I was just tired. Tired of being the wife who smiled at charity galas while he whispered to his friends that I was acceptable. Tired of sleeping in his penthouse, wearing clothes bought with his family's money, constantly reminded, subtly and not so subtly, that I was a guest in his world, never a partner, never an equal. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "I'm just not hungry." He rolled his eyes, actually rolled them like an irritated teenager, and turned back to his steak. The waiter appeared asking if everything was satisfactory, and Jonathan launched into a detailed critique of the wine pairing, using words that meant absolutely nothing except that he enjoyed watching people scramble to please him. And that was the moment I knew. Sitting there, in that overpriced restaurant, watching my husband of 8 years treat a stranger with more care than he'd given me in months, I knew my marriage was over. Not ending, over. The only question left was how much of myself I was about to lose before it was done. I didn't have to wait long to find out. I used to believe love didn't care about money.
Đoạn giữa, giữ nguyên hoàn toàn, không thay đổi.
By the time we sat in Bella Vista with rain tapping the windows like a warning, I wasn't shocked that he wanted out. I was shocked by how calm he looked, like he'd been planning it for months, like I was just the last task on his list. And the worst part? A piece of me still wanted to ask what I'd done wrong, as if love was something I'd failed at performing correctly. The signs were there long before Jonathan said the word divorce. I just didn't want to see them. At first, they was small enough to excuse. Missed dinners, late meetings that stretched into midnight, his phone face down on the table, always on silent. When I asked, he'd sigh like I was asking something unreasonable. "You know how my world works, Marianne." His world. That phrase came up a lot in the last year of our marriage, as if the life we shared was something separate from the universe he actually belonged to. When he started bringing Danielle up in conversation, I told myself I was being paranoid. Danielle was just a colleague, just a friend, just someone from his circle. The circle of people who wore confidence like tailored suits and spoke in numbers large enough to numb the mind. Danielle was always mentioned casually, almost carelessly. Danielle says the market's going to shift. Danielle thinks we should wait. Danielle's hosting something this weekend.
Always Danielle.
I'd never met her, which was strange considering Jonathan introduced me to everyone else who mattered, or at least everyone who used to matter. When I asked why Danielle had never joined us for dinner, Jonathan barely looked up from his phone. "She's not really your type," he said. I laughed then, uncertain. "What does that mean?" "It means," he replied, finally meeting my eyes, "you wouldn't have much to talk about." The comment sat between us like a thin layer of ice. Easy to ignore if you didn't shift your weight. So I didn't. His family noticed before I did, or maybe they noticed and chose silence. At Sunday brunches, his mother would study me over her coffee cup, her gaze lingering longer than usual. "Everything all right at home?" she'd ask, voice sweet, eyes sharp. "Yes," I'd say automatically. Jonathan would squeeze my knee under the table, not affectionate, but firm, a reminder. His sister stopped asking me questions altogether. Conversations turned inward, references I didn't understand, jokes I wasn't meant to be part of. I'd sit there, smiling, nodding, feeling like a guest at a gathering that used to be my own family. Even the penthouse changed. It felt colder, larger, like the walls had pushed themselves outward to create more distance between us. Jonathan stopped touching me in casual ways. No hand at my back, no absent-minded kiss on the temple. When we did sleep together, it felt transactional, brief, efficient, disconnected. I started waking up alone more often. He'd already be gone, a note on the counter saying early meeting, like a courtesy instead of a conversation. Once, late at night, I walked past his office and saw light under the door. I paused, listening. He was laughing. Not the polite laugh he used at parties, not the controlled smile he wore for investors. This was real, warm, intimate. I stood there in the hallway, barefoot on cold marble, my heart thudding so loudly I was afraid he'd hear it through the door. For a moment, I almost knocked. I didn't. Because some part of me already knew that whatever was on the other side of that door didn't include me. The worst part was how he started rewriting our history. Maybe we rushed into marriage, he'd say, out of nowhere. We were never that compatible, he'd add, during arguments he initiated. You've changed, he told me once, staring at me like he was trying to figure out when I'd gone wrong. I wanted to scream that he was the one who'd changed, that I was still here, still trying. But every time I opened my mouth, doubt crept in. What if he was right? What if I had become smaller, quieter, less interesting? What if this was my fault? That's how the seed of conflict took root, not through screaming matches or obvious betrayals, but through erosion, through the slow, deliberate wearing down of certainty. By the time we sat at Bella Vista with rain blurring the city beyond the glass, I already felt like I was losing him. I just didn't realize how thoroughly he'd already let me go. The rain was still falling when we got back to the penthouse. Not the dramatic kind, no thunder, no lightning. Just a steady, relentless drizzle that soaked into everything, like the truth I'd been avoiding. We didn't speak during the car ride home. Jonathan sat beside me, scrolling through Instagram, double-tapping photos of people I'd never met. People from his world. Trust funds, summer homes in the Hamptons, prep schools and country clubs where the membership fees cost more than my mother had earned in a year. I stared out the window, watching the city smear into reflections and light. 8 years. 8 years of trying to belong to a world that had never intended to make room for me. The penthouse was dark when we arrived. 23rd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A view people dreamed about. I used to stand there and feel like I'd won something, like I'd escaped the gravity of my old life. Now, all I felt was exposed. We need to talk, Jonathan said, kicking off his shoes as if we were discussing dinner plans. He walked straight to the bar and poured himself a glass of scotch. Single malt, 25 years, of course. He didn't offer me one. Not that I wanted it. This isn't working, he said calmly. You know it isn't. Something inside my chest cracked. Not shattered, not exploded. Cracked. What do you want? I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. He turned toward me then, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. There was no anger in his eyes, no sadness, no regret, just calculation. The look of someone assessing a bad investment. I want a divorce, he said. A clean one, quick, no drama. The word hung between us, heavy and final. Divorce. The end of everything I thought we were building. Or maybe just the end of the illusion I'd been clinging to while he'd already planned his exit. Okay, I said. The word surprised us both. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He'd expected tears, resistance, begging, some kind of emotional display that would validate his role as the reasonable one. But I'd learned something in 8 years of marriage to Jonathan Whitmore. He always got what he wanted. Fighting only delayed the inevitable and gave him leverage later. Okay, he repeated. What do you want me to say? I asked. That I'll fight for a marriage you checked out of months ago? That I'll make this messy? I won't. If you want a divorce, we'll get a divorce. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe. Then it was gone. Good, he said briskly. My lawyer will send over the papers tomorrow. You can have Harold look them over. He paused, then smiled. Oh, Wait, you can't afford Harold, can you? There it was. The blade slid in so smoothly, I almost missed it. I'll find someone, I said. He studied me over the rim of his glass, like I was something curious under a microscope. You should start packing, he added. I'd like you out by the end of the week. My throat tightened. The penthouse is in my name, he continued. As is, well, everything. Everything. Did you contribute to the down payment, Marianne? The mortgage? The renovations? The maintenance fees? Each question landed with surgical precision. No, I whispered. So yes, everything. I knew it. I'd always known it. But hearing it laid out like that stripped something raw. I have some savings, I started. Do you? He asked softly. My stomach dropped as his smile widened. That joint account we opened when we got married, I closed it this afternoon, transferred everything to my personal account. Perfectly legal, according to my lawyer. It was my money funding it anyway. The room tilted. You're welcome to whatever's left in your old checking account, he added. What was it, $600? $600. That was the value of 8 years of marriage. Designer clothes I never wanted. Jewelry that wasn't really mine. A life that could be taken back with a signature. Oh, he said casually, setting his glass down and heading toward the bedroom. And Marianne? I looked up. I'd appreciate it if you were gone by Monday morning. I have someone coming over for brunch. Someone. Not even a name. The bedroom door closed with a soft, final click. And just like that, my marriage ended. Not with screaming or tears, but with quiet efficiency, like a transaction. I didn't sleep that night. I stood in the living room for a long time after the bedroom door closed, staring at the windows I used to love. Manhattan stretched out below me, glittering and indifferent. From up here, the city looked magical, like anything was possible. From where I stood, it felt cold. I didn't cry, not at first. My body felt strangely hollow, like all the emotion had drained out of me at once, leaving behind only weight and exhaustion. I kept replaying Jonathan's words in my head, each one echoing louder in the silence. $600. I finally moved when the numbness turned into something worse. Panic. I pulled my old duffel bag from the back of the closet, the one from college, frayed at the seams, shoved behind garment bags filled with suits I'd never paid for. As I laid it open on the floor, I realized how little of this life was actually mine. The clothes, his. The jewelry, gifts from his parents. The laptop, bought with his credit card. I sorted through 8 years of marriage and felt like I was cataloging evidence of my own disappearance. What fit into the bag was almost embarrassing. A few books with dog-eared pages, photos of my mother, her smile tired but genuine. A faded Columbia hoodie from grad school, the letters cracked and peeling. My phone, the one thing I'd insisted on paying for myself, one of the few quiet rebellions I'd managed to keep. At the bottom of my drawer, under socks I'd never worn, I found the card. I froze. My mother had given it to me a week before she died. She'd pressed it into my hand in the hospital room, her fingers thin and trembling, the machines humming around us like an accusation. Promise me you'll keep this, she'd whispered. Don't use it unless you absolutely have to, but keep it. I'd promised, even though I didn't understand why. It was just an old bank card, worn smooth at the edges. The numbers were barely visible. The logo faded almost to nothing. Chase. My mother's name was embossed in raised letters. Margaret Sullivan. She'd never had much money. Nurses don't get rich. Single mothers in New York even less so. I'd assumed the account held a few $100s at most, a tiny emergency fund she'd scraped together while ignoring her own emergencies. Now, sitting on the floor of a penthouse I was being evicted from, I turned the card over in my hands. I slipped it into my wallet without knowing why. Hope, maybe, or habit, or desperation. By the time the sun rose, my duffel bag was packed. Gray light filtered through the windows, washing everything in shades of nothing. I could hear Jonathan in the bedroom, his alarm going off, the familiar sounds of his morning routine beginning. Shower, skincare, the careful construction of the man the world adored. I left before he came out. Didn't say goodbye. What was there to say? The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective. I walked for hours, my bag heavy on my shoulder, my phone battery draining because I hadn't grabbed my charger, probably bought with his money anyway. I called. "You can crash on our couch," he said. "A few days. Emily won't love it, but we'll manage." A few days, that was all I had. I'd been working at Jonathan's family's investment firm, a comfortable position I hadn't earned so much as married into. That would end with the divorce. My credit cards were tied to accounts he controlled. I didn't have a car. We'd sold mine years ago. It's ridiculous to have 2 cars in Manhattan, Marianne. Mine's nicer anyway. I'd agreed to everything. I wasn't. By noon, I found myself standing outside a Chase Bank branch in Midtown. I didn't plan it. My feet just stopped there. Before I could talk myself out of it, I walked inside. I slid my mother's card into the ATM, fully expecting it to be rejected. Instead, the screen asked for a PIN. My hands trembled as I tried birthdays. Mine, hers, invalid. 1 try left. On impulse, I entered the date she'd given me the card, the day before she died. Account accepted. My breath caught. I pressed check balance. The machine paused. Then, "Please see a banker for assistance." My stomach twisted. I walked to the desk, feeling ridiculous, like I was begging for crumbs. "Can I help you?" the banker asked, bored. This was my mother's," I said. "She passed away 7 years ago. I just want to see if there's anything in the account." He took the card, and then his face changed. The change in the banker's expression was subtle, but terrifying. At first, it was just a pause, a fraction of a second where his fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. Then his eyes widened slightly. He glanced from the screen to the card, then back again, like his brain was struggling to reconcile 2 realities that didn't belong together. He looked at me, really looked at me, and all the color drained from his face. "Ma'am," he said carefully, his voice dropping into a tone I'd never heard used on me before. Could you please wait here for just a moment? Is something wrong?" I asked. "No," he said quickly, too quickly. "Not wrong, just please wait." He stood so abruptly that his chair rolled backward and bumped into the wall. He gathered the card and walked, almost ran, toward the back offices. I stood there, heart pounding, every worst-case scenario crashing into me at once. Had my mother done something illegal? Was this fraud? Was I about to be accused of stealing from a dead woman's account? Minutes passed. Long, uncomfortable minutes. Other bankers began glancing in my direction, whispering. A woman in a tailored suit emerged from the back, said something sharp to the banker I couldn't hear. Then they both turned toward me. She approached first. "Miss Sullivan?" she asked gently. "Yes. I'm Rebecca Klein, branch manager." She held a folder against her chest. "Could you come with me, please? Somewhere more private?" My stomach dropped. The banker followed behind us, pale, hands clasped tightly together. They led me into a small office and closed the door. Rebecca sat across from me, set the folder down, and folded her hands. She took a breath, like someone bracing herself before delivering news that would fracture a life. "I need to verify your identity," she said. "May I see your driver's license?" My hands shook as I passed it over. She studied it, looked at her screen, looked back at me. Then she nodded slowly. "It's you," she murmured. "You're really you." "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely holding together. She slid a bank statement across the desk. I looked down. The account number matched the card. The name at the top read Margaret Sullivan, primary account holder. Beneath it, Marianne Sullivan, beneficiary upon death. And then I saw the balance. My brain refused to process it. Too many zeros. Too clean. Too unreal. "That's not," I whispered. "That can't be right." $247 million, Rebecca said softly. "Give or take. The account has been accruing interest for 7 years." The room spun. My mother. My exhausted, overworked mother. The woman who worried about grocery prices and wore the same coat for 10 winters. Your mother established this account as part of a trust, Rebecca continued. It was designed to transfer to you automatically upon her death, but only when the card she gave you was used. Until then, it remained dormant. I pressed my hand to my mouth. $247 million. Rebecca opened the folder again and pulled out an envelope. Your mother also instructed us to give you this. My name was written on the front in my mother's careful handwriting. Inside me, something collapsed. And, Rebecca added, sliding a heavy business card across the desk, this firm has been managing your mother's estate. Well, your estate now. A law firm in London. Embossed lettering. Weighty paper. There are additional assets, she said. Properties, investments, trusts that span decades. I couldn't breathe. I think, she said gently, everything you believed about your life just changed. I sat there for 20 minutes after they left me alone. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands. When I finally opened it, the letter was written on cheap notepad paper, the kind my mother always bought. Even now, even revealing a secret of this magnitude, she hadn't changed. My dearest Marianne, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means you finally hit bottom. Tears blurred the words as I read. She confessed everything. About lying to me my entire life, not about loving me, never that, but about who she was, about who my father was, about why we'd lived the way we did. My father wasn't Thomas Sullivan. He was Richard Chen, a man unimaginably wealthy, married, powerful, trapped in a life he didn't choose. They'd fallen in love anyway. When she became pregnant, he wanted to leave everything behind. She refused. She'd seen what money did to people, what legacy did, how it turned children into symbols instead of humans. She chose obscurity, chose struggle, chose a small apartment and second-hand furniture and pasta dinners so I could grow up free. Richard died when I was 7. His public legacy went to his legitimate family, but his private fortune, hidden investments, trusts, properties, was left to me, waiting. I wanted you to live a real life first, she wrote, to struggle, to fail, to succeed on your own, so that when you finally had everything, you'd remember what nothing felt like. I sobbed in that office, not because of the money, but because my mother had known. She'd known Jonathan would hurt me. She'd known money could be used as a weapon. She'd known I'd need something stronger than revenge. This money isn't just your inheritance, she wrote. It's your freedom. When I left the bank, the city looked different. Not shinier, clearer. Jonathan had stripped me of everything he thought mattered. But he'd never owned the one thing that would define the rest of my life. And he never would. The shock didn't turn into triumph. Not right away. If anything, it made everything heavier. I left the bank in a daze, clutching my duffel bag like it was the only proof I still existed in my old life. The city moved around me at its usual speed. Taxis honking, people arguing into phones, strangers brushing past without seeing me. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I went straight to Ryan's apartment, a 5th-floor walk-up in Hell's Kitchen. Narrow stairs, low ceilings, the smell of someone else's cooking drifting through the hallway. Ryan and Emily tried to act normal, too normal, offering me tea, asking polite questions, clearly stressed about the space, but kind enough not to say it out loud. I didn't tell them. Not because I didn't trust them, because Rebecca's words echoed in my head. Let people show you who they are, without the variable of wealth confusing things. So I lied. I said a consulting interview had gone well, that I might need to travel for work, that I wouldn't be staying long. That night, I lay awake on their couch staring at the ceiling, my mother's letter folded beneath my pillow like a fragile secret. $247 million. More wealth than Jonathan's entire family combined. More power than the world he'd always used to make me feel small. And yet, I'd never felt more alone. Because money doesn't immediately heal betrayal. It doesn't rewind 8 years of erasure. It doesn't undo the sound of a bedroom door closing behind you. It doesn't erase the way someone you loved reduced you to a number. $600. That number still burned. I thought about Jonathan in the penthouse, his penthouse, pouring himself scotch, already planning brunch with someone. I imagined him signing divorce papers with the same detached efficiency he used to order wine. I wondered if he felt relieved, if he felt powerful. And for the first time, anger surged. Not explosive, not dramatic, but cold and sharp. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd stripped me down to nothing. And part of me wanted, desperately, to prove him wrong. But my mother's voice stopped me. Revenge through destruction is too easy. I stayed in that apartment for 2 days, pretending my world hadn't tilted on its axis. Ryan's girlfriend asked when I'd be leaving. I smiled and said Thursday. Wednesday night, I called London. Alexander Whitmore answered on the second ring. "Miss Sullivan," he said smoothly. "We've been waiting for you." He arranged everything with terrifying efficiency. A first-class flight the next morning, a hotel, a full briefing on my holdings. Before hanging up, he added something casually. Too casually. "There's also a property in New York, Tribeca. Your mother purchased it years ago, designed it herself." I went there that night. The building manager was expecting me. "Your mother wanted it to feel like you," she said softly, as she handed me the keys. The apartment took my breath away. Not because it was expensive, but because it was mine. Exposed brick, warm wood floors. Furniture meant to be lived in, not admired. Books on the shelves, books I'd mentioned loving in passing years ago. A coffee maker loaded with my favorite brand. Even the cheap shampoo I'd used in college sat in the shower. On the nightstand, a framed photograph. My mother. And a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing. Not politely, not carefully. Real laughter. This was the life she'd given up to protect me. Standing there, I finally broke. I sank onto the edge of the bed and cried. Not the restrained tears I'd perfected over years of marriage, but deep, shaking sobs that racked my body. I cried for the woman I'd been, for the love I'd thought I'd had, for the freedom I hadn't known was waiting for me. By morning, exhaustion settled in. At 5:15 a.m., I stood at the windows watching the city wake up. The car service arrived at 5:30. At JFK, I boarded a plane unlike any I'd ever seen. And then, just as I closed my suite door, I heard his voice. "Jonathan." 3 rows ahead. On my flight, I froze. The universe had a sense of humor after all. I spent 7.5 hours hiding from the man who thought he'd seen the last of me. And somewhere over the Atlantic, at 35,000 feet, I realized something quietly terrifying. I didn't want him to suffer. I just wanted to be free. London changed the air around me, not because it was grander or richer than New York, but because no one here knew who I was supposed to be. At Heathrow, 2 lawyers met me at the gate. Polite, precise, prepared. Their calm professionalism steadied something inside me that had been shaking since Saturday morning. During the drive into the city, they explained the outline of my life as it truly was. My father's investments, the ethical restrictions my mother had insisted on, the scale of what had been quietly growing while I learned how to stretch pasta into 4 meals. I listened without interrupting, not because I understood everything, but because I finally understood enough. This wasn't a miracle. It wasn't luck. It was intention. My mother had built a fortress around my future while giving me the freedom to grow without it crushing me. At the hotel, I stood alone in a suite that felt unreal. Windows overlooking Mayfair, silence thick and soft, like the world had paused to let me breathe. For the first time since Jonathan said divorce, I didn't feel small. The next morning, I met Alexander Whitmore. He was older than I expected. White hair, sharp eyes. The kind of man who didn't waste words. "Finally," he said, shaking my hand. "I've been waiting 7 years to meet you." We spent hours going through documents, properties, holdings, boards, choices. But the real turning point didn't come from numbers. It came when he handed me another letter from my mother, a second one. This one wasn't about secrets. It was about choice. Your father's other children inherited obligations, she wrote. Expectations. A name that weighs more than it gives. You inherited freedom. No one owns your future. No one gets to tell you who to be. I folded the letter carefully. That afternoon, Alexander hesitated before speaking again. Your ex-husband has a reservation tonight, he said neutrally. At the Ledbury, 8:15, table for two. I felt the old instinct rise immediately, the urge to shrink, to hide, to avoid. Then it passed. Make me a reservation, I said. 8 o'clock, best table. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I refused to disappear. The restaurant was elegant without being loud about it. I arrived exactly on time, dressed simply, confidently. No armor, no performance. At 8:17, Jonathan walked in. He looked perfect. Black suit, familiar posture. That same certainty he'd worn like a crown our entire marriage. Danielle was with him. They looked like success, like the story Jonathan had always wanted to tell. Jonathan scanned the room, and then his eyes found me. I watched recognition hit him in stages. Confusion, disbelief, panic. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I lifted my glass slightly, acknowledgement, not invitation, and turned back to my dinner. Alexander leaned closer. He has no idea who you are now. We finished our meal unhurriedly. When the bill came, I paid without ceremony. I didn't look at Jonathan again. I didn't need to. At 11, my phone rang. Unknown number. London area code. Marianne, Jonathan said. His voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't confident. It was uncertain. Was that you? Yes. What are you doing in London? Living, I replied calmly. This isn't funny, he said. We're getting divorced. I know. You can't just show up like this. I didn't show up for you. Silence. Send the papers to my lawyer, I said. I'll review them when I'm ready. You have a lawyer now? Everyone should, Jonathan. You taught me that. I ended the call before he could speak again. And in that moment, standing alone in a foreign city, I felt the balance shift. Not in my favor. In mine. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. The truth didn't collapse Jonathan's world all at once. It eroded it, slowly, quietly, in the same way he'd eroded me. The morning after the Ledbury, Alexander showed me the full report. Not speculation, not gossip, facts. Jonathan's family wealth wasn't what it looked like. Years of overspending, poor liquidity, assets locked in appearances rather than substance. The kind of money that sustains an image, but not security. Danielle had been supplementing Jonathan's lifestyle for 8 months. $8,000 a month. Not generosity, strategy. The engagement ring Danielle planned to give him? Financed, not purchased outright. Another illusion, another borrowed symbol of success. They'd been having an affair for 8 months. 8 months of whispered plans, of exit strategies, of Jonathan rewriting our marriage in his head while I was still trying to save it. I felt something loosen in my chest as Alexander spoke. Not anger, relief. Because the story I'd been telling myself, that I wasn't enough, that I'd failed, that I'd been replaced by something better, collapsed under the weight of truth. Jonathan hadn't upgraded. He'd traded stability for spectacle. What do you want to do? Alexander asked. I thought of my mother's letter, of her warning about revenge, of the freedom she'd fought to give me. Nothing, I said finally. He studied me carefully. Nothing? Let him wonder, I said. Let him question. Let him marry Danielle believing he's won something. I smiled faintly. Reality always catches up. And it did. I signed the divorce papers 3 weeks later. I took nothing that wasn't mine. No drama, no demands, no last words. Jonathan was unsettled by that more than anything else. He wanted a reaction, a fight, a moment where he could feel powerful again. I didn't give him one. I returned to New York quietly. I moved into the Tribeca apartment my mother had prepared for me years ago, the one designed not to impress, but to hold me. I bought Ryan's building through a shell company, repaired the elevator, fixed the water pressure, renovated the units, lowered the stress in their lives without explanation. I never told them it was me. Some gifts don't need recognition. I took the board positions. I listened more than I spoke, learned more than I asserted, chose projects that mattered: healthcare access, clean energy, affordable housing. Money stopped being something I feared. It became something I used. And Jonathan, his life grew louder, more public, more performative. Spring came, and with it, his wedding. He married Danielle in a ceremony designed for photographs and headlines. Mutual friends said they looked happy. I believed them. Because happiness built on appearances always looks convincing. At first, I heard through quiet channels that the money pressure hadn't eased, that arguments had replaced champagne, that certainty had turned into calculation. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not regret. Just distance. Because Jonathan was no longer part of my story. He taught me a lesson without meaning to. That love never uses money as leverage. That power borrowed is fragile. That dignity is the one thing no one can take unless you hand it over. And I never would again. I don't wake up thinking about Jonathan anymore. That, more than the money, feels like the real miracle. My days are quieter now, intentional. I wake up in a home that was designed for me, not to impress strangers, not to signal status, but to let me breathe. I drink coffee by the window, watching the city move at its own relentless pace, and for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm running to keep up. The wealth changed my circumstances, but it didn't change who I am. If anything, it clarified it. I still remember what it feels like to count dollars at a grocery store, to choose between rent and rest, to build a life from effort instead of entitlement. Those memories keep me grounded in ways no trust fund ever could. My mother understood something profound, that money isn't the gift. Choice is the choice to walk away from something that diminishes you, the choice to build instead of destroy, the choice to live with values instead of fear. Jonathan believed power came from control, from deciding who stayed, who left, who mattered. He was wrong. Real power is internal. It's knowing your worth before someone else tells you what it is. It's refusing to let bitterness define your future. It's choosing decency, even when cruelty would be easier. I didn't win because I inherited money. I won because I stopped letting someone else narrate my life. Somewhere in Manhattan, Jonathan lives the life he chose. And that's fine. I don't wish him harm. I don't wish him regret. I wish him truth. Because truth is the one thing that always arrives eventually, whether you're ready for it or not. As for me, I'm building something my mother would be proud of. Not an empire measured in numbers, but a life measured in impact, in quiet kindness, in decisions that reflect who I am, not who I married. I was discarded once, and in losing everything, I found the one thing that mattered all along.